We want to welcome our outgoing curator, Jim Stocker, to the stage to welcome John Peterson, the incoming curator.
Fortunately, nobody has a 5-minute time limit on me, right? I don't know if this will be the second or the third or the 8th or the 10th time, but I just have to ask you for a round of applause for Rob and for Arena and for Sally. This has been a just fabulous reunion. Thank you, guys. So I first met John Peterson in 2005 when I went to interview him as a candidate for the Loeb Fellowship. He had a very cool architectural firm. They did very elegant $2 million, and those were expensive in those days, condominiums, really fine detailing, excellent materials, et cetera, et cetera. That had nothing to do with why John got accepted for the Loeb Fellowship. He was accepted because several years before he'd founded Public Architecture, which had two arms at that point, really, really interesting. One was this world of pro bono services, that professionals helping out folks who can't afford their services was kind of a new thing. And John was starting Public Architecture to encourage more firms to do that kind of work. He's been outrageously successful with that over the years. I'm not sure exactly what the numbers are, but it's the amount of free services that are now given to nonprofits because of the work of Public Architecture is very substantial. Secondly, he said, and those of you in the room who are architects, landscape architects will really get this, he said, most of us architects only get to work on the problems that come in the front door with a client. And those are not the most interesting problems. Many of the most interesting problems don't have a client. So let's us find some of those problems, design a solution with our set of skills, and then go find some clients, which I think is a wonderful way of turning this profession on its head for some of the work that it gets to do. So when John was selected as the next curator of the Loeb Fellowship, I was totally thrilled. And to give him more time, just 3 reasons I want to say that. First of all, John is a visionary. You architects in the room know this, I'm sure, but those who aren't don't. When John started Public Architecture, the idea of pro bono services in the architectural field was actually anathema. Most people in the architectural field felt that this was some kind of a corruption of their practice. And so the form, not that there weren't architects doing this kind of work, but the idea of pro bono services was quite a mystery. Now, a decade later, it's a common practice. The last number I saw was over 900 firms in the country donate over $28 million worth of services to nonprofit organizations every year. And I'm sure he'll tell you there are many people responsible, but the big person we point to for that to have happened is John Peterson. So he's a visionary. Secondly, John is a real leader. Along with many others, and again, John will defer a lot of the credit, but along with many others, John has really helped to shape and define, many of them are in this room today, the field of public interest design, who've claimed the idea that these skills are here to help the entire society. We've been talking about it all weekend long. John has led the formation of that whole subset of the design professions, and so he's a great leader. Thirdly, John's part of our family. He's a member of the class of '06. He understands this fellowship. He believes in the critical values that this fellowship believes in. And he has rich ideas, some of which you'll probably hear today, of how to grow our fellowship, how to make it more impactful, how to make it a greater contribution to the world. So in a word, John Peterson has already changed the world. And I expect him to spend the next decade or a decade and a half teaching all of us and a bunch of new Loebs how to keep changing the world. John Peterson.
Matt, is this on? It is on. Jim, thank you so much. It's uncomfortably kind of you, and it's humbling for me to be here. I really wish that I could have this talk over a dinner table with each one of you, but I can't. And so I thought sitting here with you would be a little more disarming. Well done, well done. Well done. You heard Jim mention the two arms of public architecture. That was awkward. So to start with, what I want to do is some have a simple conversation. I want to start by saying a little bit about myself. Jim's already introduced a lot. I'll add a little bit more for those that just aren't familiar with me. Then I want to talk with you about something I don't really know, but that you will be curious about, which is ideas that I have for the future for the fellowship. So I'm just going to share with you my thoughts. Again, I don't really know, but I thought I would be transparent as much as I can. And then finally, I'm hoping for some Q&A at the end of this. But before I start into that, I wouldn't be here except for a large group of people, starting with Charles Waldheim and the selection committee that suggested my name and others to the dean. And then, of course, the dean for hiring me. I don't think this was an easy choice. Honestly, I didn't see it coming myself, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But I'm very grateful that he sat with me and we talked on several occasions, and ultimately he felt that this was the right choice, and so did I. Additionally, I also want to thank Mark Mulligan, who, as you know, helped advance the fellowship in the year of transition, and he has been absolutely wonderfully gracious about his time and support and good feelings about helping me transition in. And then, of course, Jim has always been a great supporter, as he is for so many of you, and Sally Young for working tirelessly excuse me, to allow my transition, the smooth transition into this role. So I always get choked up when I talk about other people. So a little bit about me that you haven't already heard, but very quickly, I grew up in Kentucky. I was the son of a geologist and a public television filmmaker and documentary filmmaker. And I started in this path training under a traditional Japanese gardener. And then actually chose to go and start a very small construction company, which I ran for a few years, and then went back to school, to the Rhode Island School of Design, to study landscape architecture. And I really wanted an art-based education combined with the technical knowledge that I felt I needed to be a landscape architect. That then transformed to a path and ultimately graduated with an architecture degree from RISD. And then quite suddenly, mostly because the economy was difficult, this is 1990, I started my own practice, not really intending to do that, but it was easier for me to find work with clients than it was for me to find a job that I wanted to work in. And I mentioned 1990, and it's important in this tale. 1990, really, by my estimation, was the height of sense within pedagogy, within architecture, within the design education for architect as artist. And I don't mean that as pejorative, but it does come with it some heroic ideas about the nature of architecture, the isolation of the visionary, the designer who wants to control their vision and protect it. I came out of RISD in 1990 very much believing in separating social issues from design issues, because I felt those social issues, as did my colleagues that I came out of school with and my instructors, helped erode the clarity of design thinking. And I really believed in this. And I started a practice, as I mentioned, and I ran that practice for about 10 years. And my practice grew. It was still a very modest practice. We got up to about 10 or 12 people. And our project scale grew. And we started to have projects in-house that were having an impact on entire neighborhoods, not just a family, not just a small business, but entire neighborhoods. And when that happened, my mind exploded a bit at the responsibility I had as a good designer, which I felt I was really struggling to be, and the kinds of issues I had to now tackle. I had to embrace the 8-year-old school kid who I would never meet, that would walk by the building that we were going to design, that we would impact their day, their workplace, or their parents' workplace, where they shopped. We were having an impact on that. And I became very, very interested in tackling those more complex problems as part of the kind of discipline, as Jim mentioned, of refined detailing, thinking very carefully about design intent. So it's hard to turn a practice quickly. Practices mature over time. So instead of waiting for clients to come to us to look at these issues, we simply turned to our own neighborhood that we'd been in for more than a decade, the South of Market of San Francisco. And we said, what's a problem right here in our own backyard that we can tackle? And we can try out these ideas that we have, or this interest that we have of exercising these muscles that we were eager to exercise. And we chose a simple idea of bringing a system of open space to South of Market. We wanted to be very pragmatic about it. We looked at the politics, we looked at the cost, but we did so as an exercise. That got the attention of the planning department that asked us to give a lunchtime presentation. There were several public agency reps that showed up to that. They gave away free pizza, a good lesson to get people to attend. And they said, this is a great idea, you should pursue it. And in fact, you should pursue it, and we shouldn't, because if we pursue it, this is someone from the planning department, half the people will be against it, whether it's a good idea or not. But you can actually do this in a different way. We didn't really know how quite to do that, and that idea was a really terrific one, but it had a fatal flaw, and another group called Rebar solved that fatal flaw by doing it in a temporary way, and that has become these parklets or parking day that's now around the world. That was the beginning of that movement. So this was exciting, and it was fun, and it was interesting, and it seemed joyfully easy in a sense. And in a moment of absolute reckless naivete, I thought, oh, we'll start a nonprofit organization, and this is what we'll do. And we'll call it Public Architecture, and off we go. And thank God I was naive. Thank God I had that sort of energy, because if I looked at this with any real insight, I'm sure I would have stayed close to my practice and not done such a thing. But we stumbled along. My private practice, I could be generous with. I didn't have partners, and so I could misbehave in any way I wanted to. And I could invest fairly heavily in the creation of this organization. Eventually, I decided to let my private practice finish off its work and focus 100% on the organization. But quickly in the development, as we started to look at what projects we could pursue, we started asking questions that went beyond projects to the entire profession. And I was not focused on the profession. I wasn't an AIA member. I was just doing my practice. I was working with my clients, working with my staff, and I didn't really know what was going on. But I started asking questions like, well, if we're interested in this, if I'm interested in this, the child of an education that focused really on design for design's sake, there must be others interested in this. This must be now a growing swell of good intentions and excitement. And as we looked out, the mechanisms to support this kind of work just didn't exist in the profession. So in another moment of recklessness, we thought, well, let's move the profession. And we had a simple idea. Let's ask we'll use pro bono service like the law profession did. Let's ask every design firm in the country to give a minimum of 1% of their time to pro bono service as a kind of gateway drug to address the distance that we had from working with particular nonprofit organizations who were tackling these really fascinating problems that we had identified, I had identified at that later stage in my private practice. Jim gave some numbers. Those numbers are fortunately inaccurate now. We're over 1,400 firms who are doing approximately $60 million, supporting approximately $60 million annually. The organization has supported now over $350 million in pro bono services to nonprofits all over the country. Thanks. We're in all 50 states, but let me share with you, it's been bootstrapped the whole way. It's been white-knuckled thrills, and will continue, I'm sure, for a number of years to come. And actually, with my exit from the day-to-day operations of this organization, I'm actually hoping that we will get beyond the sort of bootstrapped, founder-led organization to a much more professionalized, focused, and systemized organization moving forward. And it's one of the reasons that that vision allowed me to step away from public architecture. I'm in the process of doing it now and step into this job. So along this path, here we are, as I stated, where the organization is. I got an email asking me if I would consider becoming the curator of the Loeb Fellowship. And I ignored that email because I wasn't Jim Stockard, and I was busy doing my thing, and that didn't make any sense at all to me. And then I got a call from Ed McNamara. And Ed helped me reconsider this. And those of you who know Ed, he has an unusually quiet but persuasive way of communicating with you and helping you see the light, which he did slowly over several weeks. And frankly, I just simply wouldn't have this job if it wasn't for Ed. So after all this, after this sort of conversation with Ed, after I stopped for a moment and thought about it, I thought, I thought this wasn't the job for me. Now I'm starting to think that I've spent the last 25 years getting ready for this job. I've started now 3 businesses. I've worked with people who've taken non-traditional paths in their career. I've coached lots and lots of people through the beginning stages of their career, through starting organizations. I've raised money. I've built things out of dirt. I've mostly done so without a lot of the right education to do it. And I think the kinds of things, the change we need, the sort of efforts that are happening in the world often are happening in environments where there aren't blueprints for how to do it. And so that aspect of this feels terribly comfortable to me, and I hope that I can use those skills to help others do that. The last piece of my sort of about me is on the lighter side, and that's the fact that I don't have a right arm anymore. About 3 years ago, and it's maybe been uncomfortable for a few of you here because many of you I probably haven't seen in 3 years, and I had 2 arms last time I saw you. But about 3 years ago, I got diagnosed with cancer, a rare thing. A category of cancer is called a sarcoma, very aggressive, very dangerous. It was in my right forearm. It was wrapped around the bone in my right forearm. It was not visible. And it grew pretty rapidly, and eventually I realized that I needed to see a doctor. My partner, Carol, convinced me to do that. And it was diagnosed quite quickly, and I underwent as much chemotherapy as they'll give human beings, and I unfortunately lost my right arm. The good news is I've been cancer-free now for 2.5 years, and what once was not a very rosy prognosis now is actually a fairly rosy prognosis. So it's good for me to be here. So a funny segue. John Loeb had intestinal cancer. He had a piece of his colon removed, fellow amputee. And from that experience, at least this is from his autobiography, he reported that he wanted to be a better person. He wanted to be a softer, kinder person. And this is leading up to his work with the GSD. He became an overseer for the GSD to help, many of you know this story, to help the GSD raise funds. And he befriended Gropius, and Gropius became his ally. And I think that's interesting and exciting because the work of the fellowship, I believe, is absolutely tied to a modernist tradition. And those of you will remember that when modernism really was coming into its own, there was a great conversation about the overlap between the built environment and health and society. You know, just natural light and connection to outdoors could change people's lives. And sadly, in the translation, I think, in this country and others, we lost that vision of the overlap of a modern sensibility about architecture and design and health and social outcomes. And there was a split between socially progressive ideas and design progressive ideas. And we've been suffering, I think, for decades ever since that happened. Now, we saw the rise in the 60s and 70s around this idea, but we still had the socially progressive and the design progressives on 2 sides of the aisle, never to dance together or rarely to dance together. And so it's important to remember that in 1969, when this was conceived, in 1970, when the Loeb Fellowship was created, Bill was there to witness all that, and maybe he'll have something to add to this later. We saw a heightened interest in social outcomes, societal outcomes for the design of the built environment. We haven't seen that interest come together until now. So we've really, except in the beginning, really been swimming upstream against the tide, against the current for the last 40 plus years. But this is actually the time for us to thrive. We haven't seen this, in all of this time. We should be absolutely thrilled, and we should be ahead of the curve here. And we should accept that we are ahead of the curve, and we're not fighting for the rear. So this comes back to, back to a simple notion that I hold in my head when I think about what it is we're here to do. And that notion was that in the late 1960s, when Bill and John Loeb were having these conversations, cities were in trouble. I'm sure John and Frances, who lived in New York City, all they had to do was look out their window. I mean, Upper East Side, so maybe they, didn't see as much out their window, but they certainly were aware that the city around them was in crisis, and that they wanted to solve that problem. They wanted to help address that problem. And if I spend time, and this is going to become important as I talk about the future, if I spend time thinking about how do we craft the path of this institution, I think about that problem-solving desire, that great responsibility, that need, the opportunity to solve problems. So, just want to make sure, one-armed guy and paper is can be challenging. So, let's talk about where we are and a little bit about the future. In a very simplistic way, but it's useful for me to think this way sometimes. In a very simplistic way, I feel like what Bill and Jim have done, Bill, who helped conceive of and create this extraordinary institution, gave it vision, and then Jim, who has invested so heavily on the experience of the fellows. It's really extraordinary. You all know this, right? That there's layers upon layers of enriched experience that you get. And these gentlemen, with the help of others, and I'll just hit the iceberg, or the tip of the iceberg, Sally Young, have made this what it is today. And it feels to me like I've been handed this exquisitely crafted car that's fully tuned up, that's got a full tank of gas. And now my job is to figure out where to drive it to next. So if I think that what's really been done here is the craft of the experience of the fellows, where I think I can offer some opportunity, or there's a place where we can go, is the building of the institution. And so what do I mean by that? Here's where I think there's opportunity that is ripe for us over the next several years to tackle. But before I do that, I do want to say that there's some things that have been started which I'll continue. One, I will continue to tweak the experience of the fellows, forgive me. That will be a never-ending process. And I'd like to experiment with ideas of bringing a little more structure to the fellowship experience. Experiment with this. I think we need to be very careful. I think the open nature, the loose nature of the fellowship is enormously valuable. But I do want to see about how we can improve that. I want to continue the really extraordinary work, and the Dean mentioned it, that's been done about helping to support the overlap, the connectedness, the co-leveraging of resources between the fellowship and the GSD. I think there's an awful lot of opportunity still to be had there on both sides. And then I want to help continue to support our tech infrastructure. We're going to be redoing the website for both outreach and internal communications. So those things I'll continue with Sally's help and others. But on the sort of institutional side, as I mentioned, I think we have an opportunity to articulate the mission. This gets back to this sort of reflection on why was this started, this idea that there are problems that can be addressed, and the communication of that mission much more broadly. So can we articulate, meaning write that mission down. Can we as a community feel good about that mission? Then can we communicate that mission outside of ourselves? What's fascinating, I think, because we've had really two stewards up until now, is even though that mission has not been written down, at least as I've seen it, I think we all have it in our hearts and minds. And I bet if we all wrote it down, we get very, very close to our neighbors in what that is. And I think that there's been a kind of oral tradition or beyond oral tradition about what that mission is. And I think that's terrific, but I think we're at a time when it might be very useful to actually articulate that mission and be able to point at it, share it, and then, like I said, share it outwardly. So that's one thing. The other thing that I think we have an opportunity to do is to help aggregate the knowledge that has passed through this institution, that lives beyond this institution. We've invested in individuals brilliantly. Those individuals have gone out into the world and brought knowledge and intelligence out into the world. But we've not captured it here in a way that builds upon itself and allows us to move the conversation around any specific topic that we may choose. So what I would like to do is to start thinking about what are those, what are the 3, what are the 4, what are the 5 topics that are really critical, that we think are critical right now, that we can invest in over the next 3 years, 5 years, 50 years. And then can we get that conversation that we house in some way, exactly what this looks like, I don't know yet, but that we house in some way that again begins to move the larger, the global conversation on those topics. And I'll share with you some of those topics. I'm happy if somebody wants to know specifically the sort of topics that I'm thinking about, just thinking. And maybe the vehicles by which we would do that. I'm happy to talk to you about my early ideas. And then finally, let's see, is that the final one? No, there's 2 more. So the other one is leveraging the alumni network. This is the hardest one, I think. But how do we begin to point the alumni network? We already do this to some degree, but I think we can do it a lot better. How do we point the alumni network at problems? How do we select alumni, give opportunity for alumni to work together towards change, to apply your expertise, your knowledge, your networks to a specific problem. I actually have some experience with this because of the matching that we do, that have done within public architecture. I both know a little bit of how to do this, and I also know how hard it is to do it with individuals. So this is not an easy thing, but it is also a terrifically interesting thing to think about. And that's not just the alumni network. Obviously, it's the current fellows, but it's hard not to focus on the alumni network. Finally, I would love it if we could help build the GSD's voice in the growing conversation about the overlap between design excellence and societal outcomes. I think this is an exciting time at the GSD. You've seen it here. You heard about the Black in Design Conference. You, I hope, can feel it in the air. And if you haven't had a chance to do that, come spend more time here. And it's not to be underestimated, I believe. And it's not just at the GSD, but it's terribly exciting that it's happening at the GSD. And I really would love to be a catalyst, I say we, the royal we, a catalyst for the GSD to help them capture this really exciting momentum around this topic. I started the shift, started public architecture, I started the shift in my practice, in my way of thinking, with 2 simple ideas: that the built environment was a criminally underutilized tool for social change, and that the separation between progressive design thinking and progressive social thinking was unacceptable. I'm happy to take questions. No questions, so thank you very much. There you go.
Actually on the top. That was great. That was extremely inspiring, and sharing the personal reasons you care about these things, because I think they reflect and magnify that in all of us. Could you mention what you think some of those topics were that you said you were happy to talk about in terms of?
Yeah, I did say that, didn't I? Well, I think there needs to be. I haven't chatted about these topics with hardly anyone, and I haven't talked to the dean about it. That really needs to be a much broader conversation. But I mean, I think there's real excitement and momentum and money, which is valuable, in the overlap between health outcomes and the built environment. There's a lot of interest within particularly public health and also just health in general about the role that the built environment plays. I think there's an enormous opportunity to take advantage of that. So that would certainly be one. I think we heard Ann Twee, I hope I'm getting his name right, mentioned new ways to democratize the information we get and the way we think about design decisions. I think that kind of engagement is ripe for transformation, and I see shamefully small investments in that. We've had wonderful investments in that in the past, and we continue. There are people that do it, but as a tool that's available to everyday projects around the world, we're quite flat-footed, and so I think that would be an exciting area to invest in. So things like that, where there's opportunity that happens, that we're in the right time, the right resources are available. I'd like to build on those kinds of things. Hey, John has a question. Does anybody have a mic? Gene, do you still have a mic? Just a second, John. Why don't you? Yeah.
Two comments and an observation. One is that I suspect I'm the oldest in Loeb years here present now. And for me, the 40-some years that I've been an alumnus have been marvelous, thanks to what I received here. The second comment I wanted to make is that I am always a little bit concerned when people, in a general sense, speak of problems and solutions, that you can go to a situation in Ecuador or Ghana or Mumbai and find problems aplenty, but you won't find single solutions. The link between a problem and a solution is a very special one, and it comes, for me, under the guise of an issue and an action. And what I sense and welcome greatly in your approach, John, is that you do see the world as a place where issues abound, but as many freedoms are present to allow you a path of action. Thirdly, I wanted to just say personally thank you to the selection committee for your efforts, and it led to us finding John here today.
Thank you, John. I just wanted to, riff off what you brought, this idea about, problems and maybe let's call them simple answers to problems. I think that's, it's sort of like fast food, and that, you can go to it, you can get immediate satisfaction, but ultimately it's not a healthy path. And so one of the really extraordinary things, and this is coming from a guy who I mentioned started a small practice, a small service business and architecture practice, very fragile thing, small architecture practice, and a small nonprofit, very fragile thing. Now I'm the curator of an enormously robust thing. It has an endowment, and unless the Western world falls into the sea, the Loeb Fellowship will be here. And so we can make multi-generational bets, and we can invest, and we can think about 50 years and 100 years. That's a terribly exciting thing to think about, and it's a terribly exciting thing to experiment with. And we should be taking risks. For coming from an organization that sprinkles risk on its breakfast cereal every day, the idea of being in an institution that has the fortitude to take risk, I will do so responsibly. I promise that. I hope to do it. But I do think we should take some risks. Mike?
I wanted to follow up on your alumni with a suggestion that over the years, I was a 86, 87 Loeb. The age of the Loebs for many years was pretty much the same, and now we're seeing younger Loebs, but there's a whole group of us who are in our 60s and 70s with beginning to have more free time, and I think really exploiting the alumni to do some radical things, I hope, is where we need to go, and we should really work on that. So that's my main suggestion, but my other one is, as a person very involved in community greening and open space, I've always felt that the Loeb Fellowship was rather weak in that area, and I hope that we see more of that.
Great. Yeah, somebody, I think it was Jim. Jim and I had lunch the other day, and Jim talked about this this community of alumni that now have more time, and we were having fun calling them super alumni or something. You would, well, we thought super alumni was a little bit better. Mike.
Yeah, Mike. Design? No. Well, Mike Houck, 04, and I felt incredibly honored to have been welcomed into the Loeb family. I'm not a design professional. I work on urban natural resource issues, and I feel really fortunate to have been invited. And you did reference the bill in the Social numerous times, and the current announcement for applications is looking for folks in the design professions. And I know, I'm assuming that there will still be opportunity for folks who are not in the design professions to come into the Loeb family. I'm just curious about the integration of the natural, the social, and the bill.
What was the first one? The natural?
Natural,
yeah.
social.
Yeah. No, you must be a designer to come into the fellowship from this point forward. Clearly, there's going to be opportunity, and we'll continue to. I'm saying that here. I do believe there's enormous value in folks that have influence over the shaping of the built environment that don't fit the traditional definition as designer or may not be trained as designers. So I see no reason not to continue that. I'll connect that with another thought, which is the positive relationship that I think we can continue to build upon with being in a design school. So when we do engage people who are not traditional designers or not trained as designers, how do we bring them into a design school environment so that they help support the design school and vice versa? So I will be looking for that kind of synergy. But I do think it's really exciting, the role that the fellowship plays. We can reach people and bring them to a design school that otherwise would be very challenging to do. So I think that continues to be an important thing to build on. I think we cannot separate built and natural environment. I'll be honest, in one sense I would like to. And the reason I would like to is because it's just hard to do everything. And in some ways I'd like to just focus on urban and, just built environment, urban stuff. But unfortunately, I don't think we can do that given the charter that we have, the basic things that we know as to why this institution was created. And so I feel like I have to accept that responsibility, and we have to continue to do that. So. Charles. All right, good. But you knew you wanted to talk.
I'm not one of those. But you inspired me. The reason why we often don't do bigger projects is because we can't afford it. You have got a lot of free people here. Free, experienced, willing people who are, I think, inspired by your challenge that we do something critical. So when we were thinking about what the Alumni Council should do, we did a little strategic planning exercise. And that gave us some focus. And so we said, here are all the things that we'd like to do, and here are the things that would have a good return. And our goal at that time was to get the alumni to work together so that the Loeb Fellowship could continue. And that when Tessa spoke about, well, gee, some of us will have more free time, it just made me realize what a resource that is. So the purpose of this is just to encourage you to put together a little group to, you can treat us like we work for you. And we will.
That's both exciting and terrifying all at once, isn't it?
So Charles, I hope you didn't tell him that I'm retiring at the end of the year. No, seriously, Tessa, I've said this for a couple of years to some folks. I think there should be a Loeb Corps, and I think Jim and Sue also inspired us at the beginning of the day with what could be done in a week in some places, and then there's different levels and grains of that. But there are many of us who like each other, would like to work with each other, want to continue to learn from each other, which is important as we get into our retirement years, and where we could add a lot of value. And I think it would be a great thing for younger professionals to see the experience and passion and commitment and dedication and learning for the social justice path that you're talking about of the crossover. And I'd put in, obviously I'm a lawyer by training. I worked in community development and housing and poor communities for my whole career, 45 years now. And I maybe, immodestly think that a perspective of someone who does both policy advocacy and then also was a policymaker for a time, or a civil rights lawyer bringing a fair housing suit, or someone building a museum, or someone writing a book about it, that those are things that should enrich the fellowship and aren't at some second steps child or different level of citizenship or agency for design professionals, especially if you want to achieve those goals you're talking about, the crossover between design and social betterment. So I think we all need to be in this work together, that the conversation has to be broader, and that frankly, I think that the school and the students would benefit. I mentored an urban design, urban planning student when I was here. I did crossover work. I brought somebody from the law school who taught local government to the GSD, who then became a teacher here. There is much more silo breaking even at Harvard, let alone the world at large, that we can be ambassadors and connective tissue for. And I would be heartbroken if we lost that unique aspect of the Loeb Fellowship. So I'm looking for some, Loeb Corps, emeritus Loeb Corps, to do great stuff cross-disciplinary together, and I hope you'll lead us in some of those efforts. But I really congratulate you, John. We're proud from the Bay Area to have one of our own, and we look forward to working with you and watching this amazing organism continue to grow organically.
Me too.
Well, this is a group of Loebs who can talk forever with John, but we do have some other things upcoming. So I think that, John's here for the duration.
I'm here.
And, we thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I know I speak for everyone that, we look forward to working with you. I do personally, and I'm sure each one of us does. And
do as well.
Echo what some of the other older Loebs have said, that we would love to stay involved. So we have a couple of things in closing. Let's see. First of all, we've asked a group of people, whoever was asked, to say 7 words about the, what's happened over the past 2 days. And then after those 7 words, we'll talk. The knowledge cafes are next, and Ken and Barbara will sort of tell people where those are, remind them where they are. And then, of course, we'll see everyone tonight, I hope everyone, at 7 o'clock. The festivities begin. So here in Piper, and then in some of the other venues around, where we'll have dinner and dancing. And I guess a couple of words, because what is a fellowship without words? So I will start with my not 7 but 6 words. Talk is good, action is better.
My words are, we define a better way to manage failure and incentivize innovation.
I didn't put them in a thought. Inspiration, impact, values, collegiality, laughter, passion, and ideas.
Human urbanizing impulse, opportunity index, and climate ready.
Hi, my name is Nidra Fears, Loeb 93, activists, designers who enhance communities and ecosystems.
Eli Spivak, 2014. Reconnect, re-inspire to boldness, refocus further down the income spectrum, and reprise a great dance night from New Orleans tonight.
Jamie Blosser, 15. We still have a lot of work to do, and we're the ones we've been waiting for.
Energizing, engaging, reconnecting, resourceful, provocative, humorous, and fun.
Matt Kiefer, 96. You'll sense a theme here. Loebism as a disruptive technology.
With our challenge up here above us, I'd like to say that knowledge is not all in this room.
I have only 4 words: connecting, engaging, challenging, and proactive. Thank you.
I said perspective, hope, and courage to go beyond what we think is possible.
The capacity for the network to learn is limitless.
That's even high for me. Burden and joy
of leadership, energy, risk, and urgency.
Engaging with the world is the best on-ramp for changing it.
Before I say mine, a quick hello to the Twitter world. Talent plus heart plus allies makes incredible things possible.
Don't leave the world to chance. Cámbialo. Look it up.
A little low-tech animation in sync with R&E. Recall, reimagine, respect, evolve, engage, excite, and reconnect.
Barbara Connect, 93, and Vanna White, 82. But as you know, he talks also. And this is our chance to start working together and talking. It sounds like a good ending to that wonderful talk by John Peterson. This is the interactive engagement with your other Loeb Fellows, the Knowledge Cafes. We have 8 cafes. You have them in your program on page 8 with the locations. We also have a
in the middle.
In the middle, yes. We also have a poster here if you don't have your booklet with you or can't steal one from someone next to you. They're up in the smaller rooms on the 2nd, 5th, 4th, 1st floor. They're starting at 3 o'clock. They go for 2 hours. Are the hosts in the room? Stand up, please. We're not going to ask you to introduce them, but so that when you walk in the room and you don't see one of these people, you're in the wrong room. No. 3:15, is that a consensus? 3:15? Okay. Other very important announcement. Etty, where are you? If you are a leader of one of the Knowledge Cafes and you have not gotten a CEU sign-in sheet, please raise your hand so Etty can give it to you. Okay. Further information, you've signed up for them, but I think it's probably okay to try to join one even if you haven't signed up. Yeah.
And there are 2 tours.
Oh, 2 tours. That's not my job. No. Come on over. Come on over.
Do remember that these are interactive. Don't let your leader
talk you to death.
Only talk you to death. You talk to them and each other.
Talk back.
So Jim is leading a housing tour, and there's a bus in front. And Elsie is leading the tour of the Cooper Gallery. And where are we meeting you, Elsie?
Right out front.
Out front as well. So thank you all, and see you tonight, I hope.